Let's get a big picture view of the research process, specifically research that's focused on applications, solving real life problems, which is the type of research that most of us want to do. We want to be able to figure out solutions to problems that affect real people. What we have here is a cycle, and research is often described as an unending cycle. We're going to start up at the top where we're going to define research objectives. It's super important to be clear what we are trying to figure out, what questions we're trying to answer, what problem we're trying to solve. If we just have this vague idea of all these different problems that we have, we go out and collect data and we're going to get really vague data that doesn't really answer anything. So we need to be super specific in defining our research objectives so that we can be sure of getting the information that we need to solve the problem, to make some conclusion, even if that conclusion is the data doesn't give us any conclusions. So we need to start off with very clear defined research objectives. After we've defined what we're trying to research, what problem we're trying to solve, we design the research. How are we going to go out and get new information? How are we going to get data? It can be in lots of different forms, but we have to have a clear strategy for doing it so that we get the right data. It's horrible to go out and collect data, and then when you come and analyze it, it doesn't mean anything, or it's too fuzzy, or it's not answering the right things. So we have to design the research, the survey that we make, the questions that we ask in an interview, so that we get the exact information we need to meet the research objectives that we've defined. So we design the research, and then we go out and collect the data. We interview people, or we have people fill out surveys, we do an experiment and observe people, measure something that they do. We get the data, and we need to make sure that we get enough data, because the more data that we get, the more that the little errors in the data are going to cancel each other out, and the greater our ability is to see what the true effect is. So we get the data, and then we analyze the data, and it can be a subjective analysis where we look at different themes in interviews, or it could be a quantitative analysis where we've measured different psychological or behavioral phenomena with numeric scales. So we get the data analysis, we test our hypotheses, we put everything together, and then the fifth point is we make conclusions. We decide what we can know, what we can't know from the data, how that relates to our research objectives, and we make some conclusions. Do we know something now? Did we learn something? And then what does this mean, and how should we apply it to the problem? Now, one of the things that happens when we do this, when we make these conclusions, we realize that there are even new questions that come up and that we need to do more research. And so the cycle starts over again. It's a never ending cycle trying to get more information to better answer problems. It's it seems it's a little counterintuitive that it never ends. We think, well, if I just answer this, get an answer for this one problem, I'll solve all the other problems in the world. Well, no, we start seeing that the problems get more and more nuanced, and there's such variety in human behavior that not everything's going to work in every situation, and that we can continually do more research to better understand how humans are behaving. So this is an overview of the research process. But what's a nitty gritty? A little cycle's not really useful when you're trying to get things done. So on the next page of this chapter 2, we have a flow chart of the quantitative research process. And it looks like we have the little Linux penguin pointing down at the bottom there. But this is a linear approach to how we can do research. And linear, I mean step by step by step by step. And if you're taking a research methods class and doing a research methods project, this is what you want to do. So this is a flow chart for the quantitative research process. So, kind of summarizing what we just saw, but in a linear fashion, where we start off with the definition of the research objectives based on something. It can be a problem that we've encountered in our lives or in our organization. It can be based on previous research. We've read about previous research that's really useful, but it's not quite enough and we need to do more. It can be based on our own personal experiences, hunches that we have, and we want to know more. It can be based on a case study of something that happened and say, whoa, we need to understand what happened in this situation. So we start off by clearly defining the objectives, and in quantitative research, we need to get a hypothesis to test. And that's a statement relevant to the research objectives that can be either true or false. Now, if you've had a statistics class, you've probably spent a lot of time on hypothesis testing. And so we need to form a very precise hypothesis so that if we find evidence that the hypothesis is true, it should contribute to a solution. It should contribute to a solution to the problem that we're working on. So that's a really important step, is this hypothesis formation. And once we have that hypothesis, we go on to step 3, the selection of a research method. It could be an experiment where you randomly assign people to 2 different categories and see what they do. And the only difference between the groups is that independent variable, the condition, and we see if there's a different of outcomes. Now, typically in organizational psychology, which is the field that I work in, you can't really do too many laboratory experiments or even real life experiments on people in work situations. It's not really ethical to do that. If something has negative consequences on people, that's bad news and unethical. So a lot of times in organizational context, work context, we use a survey. And that can be either an online survey, which is great because it's anonymous and it protects people's they won't be identified if we design the survey that way. But surveys can also be done in person. Sometimes it's easier to motivate people to participate if they're in person. So the survey is the most common type of research design, research method. But sometimes we've already got data and we need to do what's known as a secondary data analysis, where we take existing data and test a different hypothesis than what the data was originally collected for, but with which the data can answer that question for. So a secondary data analysis is great in that it doesn't take any extra effort to go collect the data. It could also be based simply on observation. We go out and observe people and take notes that what we're taking and whether they do this or that. Sometimes that's a little bit more complicated than getting them to answer a survey, but it can work in some situations. So we design our research and then we go off and we do sampling. We can't get everybody in the world to participate in our study. We've got to get a small sample, and we'll talk more about that later in the course. We need to define the selection criteria, who can participate in the survey. Are we going to get a probability or a non-probability sample? That means, are we going to try to get a random representation of everybody that in our sample space, everybody that can participate? Or are we going to go for convenient sampling because the people that we can probably get easier aren't especially different than people that we can't get easier? We invite people to participate. Typically, that's by sending them a link and trying to motivate them to participate in an online survey, and we collect the data. And then our fifth step is data analysis. We download the data if we've been collecting it online, and we've got to clean the data first of all. There's some idiot who put in ones all the way across, or drew a picture of a bunny and put in nonsense answers with the different cells that he was filling out. We've got to clean the data. We have to code the data so that we're getting actual numeric values. The reverse scored items become unreverse scored, and we'll spend a lot more time on that. And then we analyze the data using statistical tests. Like we look for a correlation R to see if two variables are related, or we use a t-test to see if there's a difference in the average of two groups. Whatever the hypothesis that we chose will determine how we analyze the data. And then finally, the sixth final step is to report. And we start off by summarizing the results, typically without mentioning any numbers when we report the results of a study. We interpret the results, what it means. We describe the limitations. We describe what we still don't know but would be good to know. And we polish and format the report so that it communicates really effectively. So this is a flowchart of how you can actually carry out research. If you're in a program where you're going to carry out research, you can follow these steps and you'll end up with a decent research project.